It was night in Nazareth. The wind descended from the hills of Galilee with a cold that cut through the skin. Inside a small stone structure, a family slept on a packed earth floor wrapped in wool cloths. The warmth came from below, from the body of a goat resting against the lower wall of the house. The embers still pulsed faintly in a metal vessel at the center of the room. And there, between the smell of damp straw and the slow sound of the animals breathing, a child slept. That child would grow up to change the history of the world, but first, he had to survive the winter. For centuries, when we imagine Jesus at home, we project our own dwellings onto the scene. Separate rooms, furniture, smooth walls, electric light. But what if that image is completely wrong? What if the simplest details of Jesus' daily life, the floor he walked on, the walls that sheltered him, the objects his family used every single day, held secrets that radically changed the way we read the Gospels? In this video, you will not simply learn history. You will step inside these houses, you will feel the texture of the mud, hear the silence of nights without electric light, understand how an entire family slept, ate, worked, and raised children in a single room with no partitions. And you will discover that the simplicity of that world was not poverty of spirit. It was a survival intelligence that shaped every word, every parable, every image Jesus used when he spoke to people. Stay until the end, because what you will find goes far beyond historical curiosity. It is a completely new way of reading a text you may already know by heart. The first impact upon entering a house from the time of Jesus did not come from the walls nor from the roof, it came from the floor. There was no wood, no marble, no polished stone. The floor was made of packed earth mixed with lime and straw, compacted repeatedly until it hardened into a surprisingly durable surface to the touch. It was cold at dawn and retained heat throughout the day. To modern eyes, it would seem like a sign of extreme poverty. But to those who lived in that context, it was a practical and efficient solution. A floor that lasted decades without cracking and required minimal maintenance. But there was a detail in that floor that changed everything. It was not level. Right after the entrance door, the house descended a few centimeters. That lower area was reserved for the family's animals. A goat, perhaps a few sheep at night, while the world outside sank into silence. The low sound of the animals breathing and ruminating filled the room. That living warmth rose slowly, heating the area where the family slept. It was not improvisation, it was survival. In the harsh winters of Galilee, the difference of a few centimeters could mean waking up healthy, or not waking up at all. Above that lower level was the family space. Everything happened there on the same floor, eating, sleeping, working, teaching the children. It was on that simple floor that Jesus crawled, fell, stood up, and took his first steps. It was there that he watched Joseph working seated, with tools scattered around him. It was there that Mary prepared food, kneaded bread, lit the fire, organized life with precise gestures, repeated day after day. That floor demanded constant discipline. Any object out of place could injure a bare foot. Any disorder compromised everyone's space. Perhaps that is why, when Jesus later spoke about foundations, about houses that stood firm or were destroyed, no one found it strange. They all knew in their own bodies that everything begins with the floor. The houses of Jesus' time had no bedrooms. There were no corridors, no fixed partitions, no interior doors. It was a single continuous space. And to the modern eye, this suggests chaos. But in practice, it functioned according to a strict, invisible, and deeply respected order. Each area of the floor had a defined use, not by architecture, but by habit, tradition, and family discipline. The higher space, away from the animals, was reserved for the family. During the day, work was done there, teaching took place, visitors were received. At night, That same space transformed into a collective sleeping area. This flexibility required constant care. Everything needed to be clean, organized, and ready to change function quickly. There was no privacy guaranteed by doors. Intimacy was built through respect, silence, and routine. Children learned early where they could step, what they could touch, when they needed to be quiet. The house itself educated. It shaped character without using words. The space did not belong to the individual, but to the family as a whole. Even without interior walls, there was hierarchy. Even without furniture, there was structure. Authority did not come from the space one occupied, but from the responsibility one assumed within it. It was in this environment that Jesus grew up, observing an order that depended not on luxury, but on practical wisdom. A silent order that prepared the ground for everything that was to come. If the floor sustained life, the walls sustained everything the family possessed. They were neither thin nor decorative. The walls of houses in the time of Jesus were thick, made of irregular stone joined with mud and lime, reaching nearly 1/2 meter in thickness beyond supporting the roof. They concealed an ingenious system of domestic organization planned from the very first day of construction. During the building process, the builders left niches open in the walls themselves, carefully calculated cavities at different heights, each with a specific function. In the higher niches, far from children's hands, were kept the most valuable items, small savings, important documents, sometimes scrolls of the scriptures carefully protected with cloths. Lower down, within reach of daily use, rested oil lamps, ceramic bowls, knives, and simple utensils near the floor. Larger niches stored heavy tools, baskets, and extra jars. Nothing was random. Each object had a fixed place known by everyone. These walls also regulated the life of the house in a silent way. During the day, they absorbed the intense heat of the sun. At night, they slowly released that heat, keeping the interior more stable. In summer, they did the opposite, shielding the family from extreme heat. Jesus grew up observing these walls that stored everything and protected everyone. It was in this environment that certain ideas gained weight. Safely keeping what was precious was not a metaphor. It was a daily necessity. Building carefully was not religious discourse, it was a matter of survival. When Jesus later spoke about treasures, foundations, and constant vigilance, he was touching experiences that everyone knew in their bodies, not only in their minds. To understand the roof, one had to look up, and to reach it, one had to step outside the house. The stairs were on the exterior, leaning against the wall, narrow, steep, with no handrail, steps worn smooth by daily use, learned since childhood. Going up and coming down was part of the routine, almost as natural as crossing the doorway. Up there, the space opened wide, flat, broad, exposed to the sky. The roof was not merely a covering, it was an extension of the house. The construction was simple and ingenious. Thick wooden beams ran from one wall to the other. On top of them, interwoven branches formed a firm base. Above that, layers of straw and mud mixed with lime were compacted until they created a resistant, waterproof surface. And when cracks appeared, it was enough to remove the dried mud, redo the layer, and let it dry in the sun. During the day, the roof was a workspace. Clothes were spread out there. Grain, dates, and figs were dried in the sun. Men repaired tools, women sewed, children played under the watchful eyes of adults at night. Especially in summer, entire families went up to sleep there. The heat of the day dissipated, the breeze flowed freely, and the starry sky became the ceiling. It was the quietest place in the house, the highest, the most private there. Everyday life touched the spiritual without ceremony. Work and prayer shared the same space. The ordinary and the sacred met on the same earthen surface. And perhaps that explains why in the Gospels, so many decisive moments happen on rooftops, places of vigil, of vision of encounter with what lies beyond the walls. Inside those houses with almost no furniture, life revolved around just 4 objects. Nothing more, nothing less. The first were woven straw mats. Each family member had their own. In the morning they were rolled up and leaned against the wall. During the day, they were unrolled as needed. They served as seats, as tables for meals, as work surfaces. At night, they returned to the floor and became beds. A single object accompanied every stage of the day. The second element was the large ceramic jars. They were not scattered around the house. They were partially buried in the ground. Each jar had a specific function: wheat, barley, lentils, oil, water, wine. The soil kept the temperature stable, protecting the food from excessive heat and insects. It was an efficient form of preservation with no modern technology whatsoever. People walked over these jars without concern. They were part of the invisible structure of the house. The third object was the oil lamp, small, simple, but essential at night. The house was never completely dark. The flame remained lit for safety, to prevent accidents and to allow someone to get up without stumbling. The light was weak but constant. In a space where everything happened on the floor, total darkness would have been far too dangerous. The fourth element was the brazier, a metal bowl in which the fire was lit. It had no fixed place.
In winter, it stayed closer to the family. In summer, it was moved farther away. It served for cooking, warming, and gathering. Simply moving it could change the entire dynamic of the house. With only these 4 objects, an entire family could live, work, eat, and rest. Nothing was excessive, nothing was missing. Growing up in such an environment taught in practice that the essential fits into very little space. Seen from the street, many houses looked alike, the same size, the same stone walls, the same flat roof, but inside, small differences separated comfort from suffering, security from constant fear. Everything began with invisible details, the quality of the mortar. For example, families with more resources used well-prepared lime mixed with fine sand. The result was waterproof walls that withstood the winter rains. Poor families resorted to simple mud mixed with straw. Over time, water seeped in, mold appeared, and the cold settled inside the house. The wood used in the roof also made a difference. Beams of cedar or oak lasted for generations. Reused or green wood began to give way after only a few years. Cracks, leaks, and fissures appeared. On rainy nights, sleeping meant listening to water dripping and hoping the roof would hold for one more season. The ceramic jars revealed another abyss. Some were thick, well-fired, with fitted lids. They kept grain intact for long periods. Others cracked easily, let insects in, and compromised the family's entire reserve. The oil also varied. The purest produced clear light and little smoke. Low-quality oil darkened the environment, irritated the eyes, and impaired breathing. In poor houses, smoke was a constant companion. But the cruelest difference lay in the reserve. Some families managed to store food for 2 or 3 years. Others lived with provisions for only a few months. A drought, a plague, an unexpected tax, and everything disappeared. Gradually, they sold their utensils, then their tools, until almost nothing remained. Poverty did not arrive all at once. It seeped in like dampness through poorly made walls. It was in this setting that certain stories told by Jesus gained concrete force. When he described the chasm between the rich man who feasted and the poor man who survived on crumbs. In the Gospel of Luke 16, he was portraying inequalities that began inside the houses, in the quality of the walls, in the reserves, in the light that illuminated the night. These images were not religious abstractions, they were social portraits, scenes that everyone in his audience had lived or witnessed. A house in the time of Jesus was not a place of rest. It was a living organism. The day began before sunrise. The woman was the first to wake. She went to the embers in the brazier, coaxed the fire back to life with slow, steady breaths, and began preparing the bread. The process took hours. The grain had to be ground first with a hand millstone, a physically demanding and repetitive task. Then the flour was sifted, the dough prepared with water and salt, shaped into flat rounds, and baked on heated stones or in a clay pan over the fire. The smell of bread filled the room and marked the true beginning of the day. Men left early for work, carpenters, fishermen, farmers. The village woke in waves, first the women at the fire, then the men at their tools, then the children sent to fetch water. The spring or well was outside the house, sometimes at a considerable distance. This task fell primarily to girls and young women. It was at the well that news circulated, alliances formed, and the village's information flowed. In the afternoon, the heat of the sun made outdoor work difficult. It was the time for lighter tasks inside or in the shade of the house. Weaving, mending clothes, preparing simple herbal remedies, caring for younger children. The teaching of children happened naturally, woven into the work itself. The father taught his son while he worked. The mother taught her daughter while she cooked. There was no separate school. The house was the classroom. At night, the family gathered. The main meal was in the evening. Simple but essential: bread, olives, boiled lentils, sometimes cheese or dried fish. They ate seated on the mats in a circle, with their hands from shared bowls. After the meal came a moment of conversation, of prayer, perhaps the recitation of a passage from scripture if someone could read. And then the mats were spread out, and silence took over the house. The house was not merely a physical space. It was a sacred space.
In the Jewish tradition of the 1st century, religious life was not confined to the temple or the synagogue. It penetrated every corner of the home. In the mezuzah fixed to the doorpost, a small container holding fragments of the scriptures, and in the touch of the hand upon entering and leaving, in the blessings before meals. In the weekly Shabbat, which transformed the house into a place of absolute rest. No fire was lit, no work was done. The entire family gathered around silence and prayer. Children learned the prayers before they learned to work. The Psalms were recited from memory, passed from generation to generation before writing was within everyone's reach. The Torah was not a book. It was a living voice that dwelled in the mouths of parents and the memory of children. Jesus grew up in this atmosphere. Every gesture of daily life was at once practical and sacred. Lighting the lamp carried a religious dimension. Preparing the bread carried a religious dimension. Storing the scriptures in the wall carried a religious dimension. There was no separation between the world of labor and the world of God. They coexisted on the same earthen floor, in the same undivided room, in the same family that slept together under the stars. Perhaps that is why the teachings of Jesus sound so embodied, so concrete, so close to the simplest human experience. He did not learn to speak about God in a palace. He learned in a room of stone and mud, where the sacred and the ordinary breathed the same air. When we step inside the houses of Jesus' time, we are not merely studying archaeology. We are entering the space where the Son of God lived ordinary life. Earthen floors, stone walls with niches, 4 objects, 1 room for everything. An entire family sharing the same space, the same air, the same fire. Nothing was superfluous. Everything had function, purpose, and limit. It is in this setting that the Christian faith gains historical weight. Jesus did not teach from palaces, but from houses where every detail could mean security or loss, abundance or scarcity. He knew daily labor, forced simplicity, and economic fragility. And he also knew the beauty that exists when a family, in a small space, learns to live with what is truly essential.
That is why his words cross the centuries with such authority. They are born from real life, from the floor he walked on, from the walls that sheltered him, from the rooftop where he slept looking up at the stars, from the meals he shared and the cold nights he endured. By understanding how these families lived, we realize that the essential has always fit into very little space. The true wealth was never in the walls, but in what is kept within them, in love, in teaching, in faith passed from generation to generation. And perhaps the question that remains is not about them, it is about us. What do we keep within our walls? What do we pass on to those who sleep under the same roof? What will remain 2,000 years from now of who we were?